Hey everyone, Lucky here. Between the early access beta and the previous media beta, I've played about 50, 60 hours of Diablo 4 at this point in time, and I want to go over what I think are the 8 most important mechanics of Diablo 4 and ARPGs in general, and give my opinion on which game they most closely resemble, Diablo 2 or Diablo 3. In each of the mechanics, itemization, trading, combat, the overall atmosphere of the game and how it feels, skill tree and build power slash character customization. We have bosses we're going to review, the game's overall balance, and the ultimate end game, PvP. All right, so let's start us off with the environment. The environment in Diablo 2 is a very dark and gothic vibe. You'll often see scenes that are horrific, and this is more closely resembled to also Diablo 1. So I even used the icon of the butcher from Diablo 1 because I think Diablo 1 really set the tone for Diablo 2. There is a very dark and grim and despair that is felt when playing through the game. There are some particularly gruesome areas that you will encounter in the game, and overall, just much more muted tones, dark colors. On the other hand, Diablo 3 is a much more cartoonish sort of vibe. There are much brighter colors. A lot of people have a comparison to WoW, World of Warcraft, for the Diablo 3 animations, and I'm reserving judgment. I'm not going to say which I think is better, one versus the other. I am traditionally more of a Diablo 2 fan, but I played thousands of hours of both Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. It's not my place here to say which game I think is better. I am just merely comparing the two, Diablo 3 versus Diablo 2, and how Diablo 4 compares. Diablo 3 cutscenes also had a very different vibe. I don't think that they were as gruesome or as dark as Diablo 2 and previous game Diablo 1 cutscenes. I think one of the cutscenes that sticks most in people's minds is the butterfly that kills Deckard Cain. Really a sad moment for Deckard Cain, and Diablo fans mourned his loss there. But just this is just an example to see kind of the differences. Now, Diablo 4 environment definitely feels more towards the dark and gothic vibe, so more akin to the Diablo 2, Diablo 1 era. The devs have even mentioned that that was the inspiration for this game. They're kind of taking a 180 from where the graphics were in Diablo 3. So for all these reasons, I think that the environment definitely goes into the Diablo 2 bucket. Now let's talk about character itemization. Itemization in Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 may look similar in the sense that you have magic, rares, uniques, set items, and but the way that they operated were really much different. Diablo 2, for instance, magic and rare items in a lot of cases were actually sometimes better than uniques, which was really never the case in Diablo 3. Unique items were much harder to find in Diablo 2 as opposed to Diablo 3, and they would feel so much more rewarding when you did find them because of their rarity. Now in Diablo 3, you start the game by getting essentially a free set, and set items and unique items are the only viable items in Diablo 3. Magic, rare, normal items, they really serve no purpose at all. The way that Diablo 3 works in itemization is that your set and unique items are basically going to be what gives your build all your power. We're going to talk about that when we get to the skill tree and customization a little bit more. In a sense, the rare items really had no purpose in Diablo 3. It was all about sets and uniques. Now in Diablo 4, we actually don't even have set items yet. We may get them in a future patch, but as it stands now, rare items and legendary items are really actually very close to one another. So rare items have a significant value, and in a lot of times can actually be and should be in almost all cases better than the legendary items that drop. And that's because you can extract a legendary essence from that legendary item, apply it onto a rare item, and it immediately becomes a legendary item with potentially one more affix than a legendary item could even get. So, in a sense, rare items in Diablo 4 can actually even be better drops than legendary items. And this is very akin to a Diablo 2 style of gameplay. Also, on items, we're getting plus skills in Diablo 4. So plus skills were completely removed from the game in Diablo 3, and those were something that we saw a lot in Diablo 2. So for that reason and more, I believe that the itemization falls well into the Diablo 2 realm of categories. Now for trading, I think trading is a fairly simple and straightforward one. In Diablo 2, there was free and open trading, next to no restrictions. Trade any item with any player, no matter what. In Diablo 3, on the other hand, trading was removed entirely from the game. The only way you could even give an item that you found to another player is if you were in the same game with them with a maximum party of 4 and it drops while you are all playing together. You would be able to give that item to your friend. So the pretty stark differences between Diablo 2, Diablo 3. For Diablo 4, there is free and open trading for any rare item that drops. And as I said previously, rare items are actually extremely important in Diablo 4 and can be some of the best items that you can find in the game. So I think it's important to note that while there are some trade restrictions in Diablo 4, you can't trade legendary items, you can't trade unique items. Being able to trade rare items, which are going to be your best in slot items most of the time, is still pretty free and open trade wise to me. And I don't think it's nearly as restrictive as Diablo 3 is, obviously, because you can't trade anything in Diablo 3. So I'm going to put Diablo 4 trading in the Diablo 2 category because I think that overall the trading of rare items is going to create a nice, robust economy that's going to bring the community together, much akin to a Diablo 2 style trade. Build power and customization. So in Diablo 2, your skills were essentially permanent. You got 3 respecs, but once you put a skill point in, you were pretty much building for your end game build. The gear that you wore was sort of variable around the skills that you put in. The majority of the power that your character got was from the skill points that you placed and even your stat points in some cases. So it was much more important where your skills were going in Diablo 2. When we compare to Diablo 3, all your power really comes from your gear. So it depends on what you drop early or what the first set bonus is of a specific season. That is going to entirely dictate the build that you want to play. You no longer really get a choice of what build is best. The gear that you find kind of decides it for you in Diablo 3. And without gear, you are useless. In Diablo 2, you could beat the entire game with a naked character, no gear at all, with just skill points. That was how it was designed. It's been done by multiple players, completely naked. Gear is not required. You could be a 3,000 level Paragon in Diablo 3 and try to play with no gear, and you won't even be able to kill like a T1 Rift or anything like that. So gear is entirely dependent in Diablo 3. In Diablo 2, it was much more aligned with where you chose your skill points. For Diablo 4, the skill tree is very important, and I think almost equally as important as your gear. So because the fact that your gear is not the only thing dictating what build you play, and that skill points are a little bit more permanent in Diablo 4. Putting your skill points in Diablo 3 really had no consequences to it. You really never got attached to any specific build. And I think in Diablo 4, you're going to be picking your build at the start of a season. You're going to be speccing into it, and you're going to be finding gear that complements the build that you choose. And that feels very much like Diablo 2 to me as opposed to Diablo 3. So for build power and customization, we're going to put that in the Diablo 2 category. The next category is combat. Now in Diablo 2, combat feels very slow in a lot of cases. Until you have basically your end game Sork with 200 faster cast rate, you're really not exploding entire screens in Diablo 2. As opposed to Diablo 3, once you get, your first set bonus, pick whatever build the set bonus gives 10,000 damage to, and you could run T1 rifts and T1 maps. You're basically just going to run through the map. You're going to explode the entire screen, and it's extremely fast-paced. For Diablo 4, it was difficult for me to choose. The combat in Diablo 4 feels slow. This is only based on the beta test, so we've only gotten to level 25. So I expect endgame optimization, it may be just as fast as Diablo 3. But for right now, it actually does feel very much like Diablo 2 with the speed at which you are clearing monsters and fighting monsters. But the combat feels a lot like Diablo 3. It feels like a lot of skills were taken from Diablo 3, and I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that the combat system in Diablo 3 was actually much more evolved. Combat in Diablo 4 feels very slow and much more like Diablo 2, but Diablo 4 combat we're going to put in the Diablo 3 category at the moment. A lot of the skills and a lot of the feel of the characters we've been able to play so far do feel like that they've come from the Diablo 3 skill tree, essentially. I could also see the combat becoming pretty fast-paced towards the end. A lot of characters have these mobility skills that allow them to move faster. And with the introduction to things like cooldowns that we saw in Diablo 3, I think a lot of the combat skills and the characters you're going to play in Diablo 4 will have some sort of cooldown on their skills. And that really wasn't a thing in Diablo 2. So for combat, we're going to put it in the Diablo 3 category. The next topic we're going to talk about is game balance. In Diablo 2, the game is not very balanced. And this is from years and years of playing the game. Every season you see people starting Sorceress because it has early access to the skill Teleport, or you see a Hammerden because they do the most damage in the game, and the other skills are kind of left behind. Nobody starts a Barbarian because the combat system is very complicated and really not user-friendly in Diablo 2. As opposed to Diablo 3, I think every class in Diablo 3 is pretty viable with one another. And you see every season, you can check the Greater Rift leaderboards, and they're all not too far apart. There's never really one class that really stands out. And each season, the balancing is different. They'll change a set around, or they'll change a unique item. And they really maintain balance very well between all the classes in Diablo 3. So far in Diablo 4, it feels very much like Diablo 3 in terms of balance. There isn't this big discrepancy like we saw in Diablo 2 where everyone is playing just one character. Everyone's really enjoying just testing out all the different builds, and everything seems fairly viable, and you can make with it what you want. So I think for balancing, we're going to put that in the Diablo 3 category because I think Diablo 3 had much better balancing than Diablo 2 had. The next thing we're going to go over are bosses. Bosses in Diablo 2 were awesome. The first time fighting one, you would probably feel completely overwhelmed, and each of them have their own abilities and really good strengths and even some weaknesses that after playing them a couple times, you pretty much get the hang of it, and you can take them down with ease. Diablo 3 bosses were actually really good too. There's some really good boss fights like Belial, the Malthael fight, and they are multi-mechanic fights. You have different phases, you have different stages of the fights, and really what a more modern day ARPG in terms of boss fights would look like. I think bosses in Diablo 3 were pretty well designed. Right now, Diablo 4 feels like the boss fights that we've had are much more involved. They remind me a lot of the Diablo fights, the boss fights in Diablo, even Path of Exile. I know we're not talking about Path of Exile today, but the boss fights that we have had access to in the betas have felt a lot more like a Diablo 3 boss fight as opposed to a Diablo 2 boss fight. And the last category is endgame, including the ultimate endgame of PvP. Now, endgame doesn't really exist in Diablo 2 outside of PvP. Other than chaos runs and bell runs, there really isn't a whole lot to do in Diablo 2 endgame. Just recently, we've gotten an update for Terror Zones, but if you haven't played Diablo 2 in a while, you don't even know what those are. There's an Uber fight, but everyone really knows how to cheese it, and it's not very challenging content, Diablo 2 endgame, outside of PvP. In Diablo 3, the endgame are rifts. You do a rift, you do another rift, you get better gear, you make your rift harder, and you do another rift. The entire end game in Diablo 3 is around keeping the monsters as strong as whatever gear you find. So you really don't have this sense of I'm getting stronger other than your rift number is going up, because as you get stronger, you're really just scaling the enemies to be as strong as you are. In Diablo 2, the end game kind of feels very static, right? The end game in Diablo 2 doesn't change. Not that there is a whole lot. But the stronger you get, the stronger that you feel in the end game. Now, we haven't gotten our hands on too much end game in Diablo 4, but we do know that there's going to be a robust PvP system that they're going to try to keep balance and maintain in the game. Now, Diablo 3 didn't have any PvP. Since Diablo 3 really only has one version of endgame, which is rifts, and we know that there's going to be a lot more to do in endgame in Diablo 4 and PvP included, I would say that this definitely falls more into the Diablo 2 category of endgame. And then finally we can see our results. Diablo 4 is most like Diablo 3 in the combat, in the bosses, and in the game's overall balance, while Diablo 4 most resembles Diablo 2 Resurrected in its itemization, trading, overall atmosphere, end game, including PvP, and the skill tree and item classifications. And I'm going to leave you here with my parting thoughts on Diablo 4. I really enjoyed playing the beta. There are some things I'd change. I don't like restricting trade at all, but I think I can see where the devs were coming from when they decided to do that. I really enjoyed the atmosphere and the whole art style of the game. The bosses fights were fun. The combat was really engaging. I like the combination of the skill tree and gear to get your power and not have it solely be reliant on gear. But I want to know what you guys think. Again, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.